What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We've got a great episode lined up for you today because we're talking to Field Yates of ESPN. He's got all kinds of draft intel that he's going to be able to share with us. He was all over the draft for ESPN, for ABC, podcasting all the time with the legend Mel Kiper. And so you know that he has a lot of great insight on these Patriots picks. And we're focusing on the top of the draft because there's one player in particular that Field absolutely loves for the Patriots. It's their second round pick, wide receiver Ja'Lynn Polk out of Washington. Have the comps that have been thrown Polk's way been fair? Why does Field Yates feel as though Ja'Lynn Polk could be one of the 5 best receivers taken in this year's draft class? Ultimately, that's how we'll view him. Boy, that'd be a home run for the Patriots. He was taken within the top 10. He was one of the first 10 receivers taken in this year's draft. But if he was in that tier right below guys like Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. and his teammate Rome Odunze, that's a home run for the Patriots. So going to get all sorts of Polk insight. We're going to talk about Drake Maye, of course, and just big picture with this Patriots draft. Have they done enough to lay the foundation for the next great Patriots team? Great guest for us today. It's Field Yates out of ESPN. Let's get to that conversation. Why keep you waiting? Let's get to it right now. Very excited now to have with us on the Next Pats podcast, the great Field Yates, ESPN, the First Draft podcast, the Fantasy Focus podcast, all things NFL for the worldwide leader. Field, thanks for being with us, bud.
Phil, great to be on with you. It's been a little while since you and I had the chance to cross paths, but always looking forward to talking to all things Patriots with you, and a lot going on up there in Foxborough these days.
So much going on. There's a GM search. That's not really a GM search that's happening right now. That's kept us busy the last couple of days here, but the draft is still something that we're picking away at. You are the perfect person for us to ask about this draft class because you were all over all of these guys, and you were such a key part to the draft coverage that weekend that I'm sure you've still got hundreds of names swimming around in that brain of yours. But I just want to ask you right off the top, when you look at the Patriots draft class and knowing this team as well as you do, what was your favorite pick? What was the best move of the weekend for the New England Patriots?
Well, that's a good question. When you put favorite pick, so I think the low-hanging fruit answer is, of course, Drake Maye, because he was the highest drafted player, which ostensibly should represent the player that ends up having the greatest impact. And I do think that's where things will shake out with Drake and the Patriots, because I was a big believer in Drake from the start of the process, really since the day after the regular season was over and we had the non-playoff team draft order. I stated my case then, and I felt good about it throughout the process, and ended up playing out this way was that, the order of the first 3 picks should be quarterback, and the Patriots should simply take whichever one was left over for them because all 3 merited top 3 overall pick consideration. So there was no consolation prize in this draft. But the player that, and this ended up working out well for a conversation like this, covering the Patriots, that I would say probably was my favorite pick was Ja'Lynn Polk. In the draft analyst role, it's important to try to size up the draft accurately early as best you can. You want to make sure that you are talking about players that you think will go in the first round as much as you possibly can, and also making sure that you actually know which players will go in the first round, because it sort of shows that you are evaluating players and in line with how the league thinks. It's also important, in my estimation, to have some players that you say to yourself, I don't care if this guy goes in the first round or undrafted. I just like this player a lot. And Ja'Lynn Polk was the player that fit that category for me. There were a bunch of them, but he was part of what we called My Guys, a segment that me and Kiper did on First Draft as we got closer and closer to the draft. And the conceit was, hey, guys that I don't think will go in the first round, but I'll pound the table for if I were in the proverbial draft room. Polk wound up at 42nd on my big board, goes 37th overall. So right about the proper range of where he ended up going versus where I had him ranked. It was a deep wide receiver class, obviously. And he was, I think, the 7th or 8th receiver taken in this year's draft class. But if you told me, 3 years from now, he's one of the 4 or 5 best wideouts from this class, it's going to be really hard to crack that top 3, given the 3 players that went in the first 9 picks. But if you told me he looks like a value in 3 or 4 years, wouldn't surprise me a bit.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper on that. Why do you say he could end up potentially being the 4th or 5th guy. There are obviously some great athletes in this draft. It looked like the Patriots tried to move up to maybe get one of those athletes, maybe somebody like Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, just a bigger body, 4'3", 40 type of specimen physically. Why could Polk actually enter into the conversation as the best of the rest outside of that top 3, in your opinion? I know you had bought up all the Ja'Lynn Polk stock before the draft. Like, you were driving the bus on the Ja'Lynn Polk bandwagon. So why do you feel that way about this guy?
Yeah, Polk isn't an elite athlete, but he's also not a bad athlete, which I think has become one of the misconceptions about these players that aren't Malik Neighbors type explosive, or his teammate Brian Thomas Jr. type explosive, or like you mentioned, Xavier Legette, who 6'1", 221 pounds, running a 4.39 40. That's special right there. That obviously is terrific. You can't coach it, you can't teach it, but Ja'Lynn Polk's a solid athlete. He was a good athlete, 4'5", 240, 37-inch vertical. I think that was a half an inch ahead of his teammate Rome Odunze, who no one talks about Odunze's athletic ability in anything other than a positive light. So Polk's a good athlete for sure. I've used this analogy a lot. I won't have that many more chances to use it, so I'll go back to it one more time. Polk is kind of like what I would say is an old school NBA post player, where it's not a lot of flash, not a lot of sizzle, but a lot of substance. An NBA post player, he got you buckets, 10 for 14 from the field consistently, and none of those shots came from further than 5 feet away from the basket. Polk just runs good routes, makes contested catches, has awesome body control, very good after the catch, incredibly tough. It has a lot of maturity to him as well. Wherever he's gone, he's thrived. Began his college career at Texas Tech for 1 season, transferred to Washington, and a lot of respect for a guy who very early on during his playing career at Washington got hurt, battled his way back from a shoulder injury that a lot of people thought might have just said, hey, you know what, we'll see you again next year. But I think his determination, his work ethic all really showed out to Washington during that process. And when you've got a young quarterback, and Drake's, I think, the second youngest of the 6 that ended up going in the first 12 picks behind only J.J. McCarthy, you need to surround him with the right kind of people. That's not just the coaches. It's not just a good offensive line. It's not just talented players, but it's also guys who have that right mentality. So I thought the mental for Ja'Lynn Polk was also very good, on top of the excellent physical traits as well.
I love the NBA post player comp. Like, if the
Been
Patriots have
using them a
found their
lot.
Kevin, if he's Kevin McHale, like, they'll take that. Like, that works.
Yeah, if you
Right.
go back and watch them, though, like, there are some big plays, no doubt. The semifinal game against Texas, the opening drive, long catch. A lot of it was after the catch as well, but there's just a lot of stuff too, where it's playing the perimeter, 15-yard out route, 12-yard comeback, you name it, right? It's just stuff that it's going to move the chains. And those Patriots offense, which really had to grind for every single point that scored last season, needs some guys that can make life a little bit easier. And there's going to be a real trust, I think, developed early on between Drake Maye and Ja'Lynn Polk. He's the kind of player where, this is another football cliche that's probably overused, but even when he's covered, he's open. Some people hate that phrase, but with Polk, I call the hands like vice grips. It's not. We think of catches like the Odell Beckham Jr. 2-finger catch, which are, highlight reel plays that will live on, really the internet forever. But we saw in SportsCenter Top 10 for, it felt like, months straight. Those are great. I'm not saying those don't matter, but that's not the only way you define good catches. Like, to me, quality catches and having great hands is the ability to catch a football thrown a bit behind your body, having the ability to make tough catches in traffic, having the ability to adjust midair. And I thought that Ja'Lynn Polk just really showed up in that category consistently throughout his entire Washington and Texas Tech career.
So the 2 names that I heard, that I was given soon after the Patriots made the pick with Polk, Field, in terms of comps, and we know comparison is the thief of joy. We don't want to linger too much on these, but I did find them interesting. One of them, because he's a former Patriot, was Jacoby Myers. That was one name that came back to me. Just, tough, will block in the run game, reliable, quarterback's best friend kind of guy, will do that dirty work over the middle. The other one was a guy who actually was on the Bengals when Patriots offensive coordinator, now Alex Van Pelt, was with the Bengals, Tyler Boyd, who had a couple of back-to-back, 1,000-yard seasons when those two overlapped there in Cincy. Are those fair comps for you? Do you feel like there's a little more, people here love Jacoby Myers, but he was what he was sort of after the catch, and he wasn't, you wouldn't label him as like the biggest sort of explosive threat that you've ever seen. So what do you think of those two comps? Is there another one that might even work better for you?
Yeah, I think that there's probably more upside for Ja'Lynn Polk than what Jacoby Myers was with the Patriots, a guy who was very reliable, and that also applies to Polk. But with Jacoby, I think part of the reason why he did not end up sticking around with the Patriots, and obviously that was an ill-fated decision. But the idea was, how far are you willing to extend for a player who may not be a game changer? And Tyler Boyd, the tricky one now is that people are going to think about the Tyler Boyd that we have seen over the past couple of seasons, a player who's really solid, but kind of had settled into appropriately that third wideout role with Cincinnati, and now, of course, will be a Tennessee Titan. I don't, my friend Matt Miller, my colleague Matt Miller, is the comp king. He's so great at just throwing out names that, I think that the trick with comparisons, and the reason why I haven't necessarily made myself the comp prince, is that no one likes comps where it's like, yeah, he Ja'Lynn Polk comps too, and just make up some third wideout who played for a few years and then phased out, right? Or you don't want to call him Puka Nacua because he's not an elite athlete, but he could be a really good player because Puka just had, I don't know, if not the best rookie wide receiver season ever, one of the top 5 at the very worst. So I don't know that I have a perfect comparison for Ja'Lynn Polk. I think those are relatively reasonable ones. Jacoby Myers, maybe last year's version of Myers that we saw in Las Vegas, which I thought was more explosive than we saw in New England, might be a good one there. But going 37th overall, I think is indicative of a guy that I do think the Patriots believe has a bit more juice. He's not going to be the kind of guy that's going to consistently run away from players in the open field, but I think there's some toughness there. There's some burst there, some juice there, especially prior to the catch. And, I know Patriots fans, I've seen one of the pushbacks has been like, did we just draft N'Keal Harry 2.0? And, I don't know that I think he's a better athlete. I do think that with Ja'Lynn Polk. And I'm not saying it's just about how you approach the game, but one thing's clear, like Ja'Lynn Polk's mentality is a different stratosphere than N'Keal Harry, a guy who I think needed to kind of be pushed consistently at every juncture. I don't think you're going to have to worry about that with Ja'Lynn Polk. So I do think there is, this term has become very common now, but there's definitely some dog in Ja'Lynn Polk that I think really serves him well to maybe make an immediate impact because, well, the Patriots kind of have, strength in numbers approach at wide receiver. There's not, at least in my estimation right now, a clear-cut number one guy who is going to be the target king for New England. And I think there's a chance that Ja'Lynn Polk, with some things breaking in his favor, could have a pretty prominent role right away.
Patriots fan would love to hear that. I'm glad we got to dig a little deeper on Polk because I know what a big fan of Polk's game you are, Field. So I'm glad we got to hit on that. I want to hit on, of course, though, that first pick. And you mentioned Drake Maye and how you were a believer in Drake Maye. We already, of course, we've already zoomed like all the way through OTAs and training camp. And now we're talking about week 1 and who's going to be the starting quarterback week 1. The question I wanted to ask you was, if he is starting week 1, Field, he will have done what, in your opinion?
What I think has a pretty decent chance to happen during the preseason, and you and I know this because we've seen so many moments, good and bad, right? I mean, you and I were on the beat together when like Zach Sudfeld was catching passes left and right and looking like the next Gronk or something, right? We have also seen players that struggled in the preseason. I remember this is a deep cut, but I remember Matt Castle in 2008, the year he ended up starting 15 games, was completely unpredictable in preseason. He ended up playing pretty well there, right? Filling in for Brady in very unusual circumstances, obviously. So we've seen preseason prove to be worth something or nothing. But with Drake, and this is not trying to become a Drake versus Mac Jones conversation, but the Patriots fans are about to witness a different level of arm strength and zip and arm talent, which I know some people hate that term as well. But, Drake's going to have some absolutely jaw-dropping throws at some point during training camp, whether it's throws way down the field, whether it's throws with great accuracy, whether it's throws on the run. I mean, he's a special thrower of the football. His 2023 tape keeps getting dissected as if, Drake Maye played terribly. No, he just was not as good as he was in 2022, in part because that 2022 season was absolutely ridiculous. He and Jameis Winston, the only player to win all 4 major offensive awards, which included both rookie and, all season awards for ACC. So all year awards, I should say, for the ACC. So to me, what Drake brings to the table is indisputable. It's going to be refining some things. I still, right now, and this is a May 8th prediction, Phil, think this is going to end up being Jacoby Brissett coming out of the gates for the Patriots at quarterback, in part because I think, and I feel like I've heard Mayo and also Elliot Wolf sort of suggest this, is that, like, I think Jacoby sort of standing within the league is pretty well established, that he's the kind of guy that, like, he's kind of maximized his ability consistently, even if he hasn't stuck around anywhere. I feel like there's a lot of respect in that locker room for Jacoby. And while I don't think anybody has any illusions that Jacoby Brissett's going to become this Patriots 10-year fixture at quarterback, might be enough to kind of keep you in it early in the season. And then at some point, if this team is, if this team's 2-5, or if this team is struggling to score offensively, you can pull the Drake card. I just think that it's a lot easier to be patient and eventually press the eject button on the rookie quarterback who's been stuck inside the car seat, as opposed to starting the rookie early, seeing him struggle, and then trying to put him on the bench and potentially compromising sort of his mental state of mind.
Yeah, I think that is a huge key to all of this. Is once you get him in there, really hard to take him out, and it would have to go really poorly, which obviously nobody there is rooting for. Field, last thing I want to get you out of here on, sort of a big picture question. No, this can't be answered, with tremendous accuracy. Although if you do answer it with tremendous accuracy, like when we find out years from now that you have hit on this, we will come back and we will give you all your flowers because you'll be deserving of them. But this is what Patriots fans want to know, right? Did they lay the foundation for the next great Patriots team with this draft? We've seen so many great Patriots drafts in the past. 2010 with McCourty and Gronkowski, 01 with Seymour and Light. Is there a chance that this draft ends up being one of those types of drafts for New England?
There's a chance for a very specific reason. Now, I'll say this. I view a successful draft class as somewhere which, like, let's call it 3.5, because it depends on how many picks you actually have, but 3.5 players making it to a second deal that is not like you have literally 0 offers elsewhere and we're keeping you around, right? So like the 2020 draft class for the Patriots, that's a foundation type draft class between Duggar and Onwenu and Anthony Jennings. I think I'm forgetting somebody else from that class. But, like 3 guys or 4 guys retained, like that's a pretty good hit. The reason why this Patriots draft, but you need to do that in successive drafts. Like I think it's 2 or 3. I think like Buffalo's done a really good job with this. Kansas City's done a really good job with this. Baltimore. No surprise, the teams that I'm talking about are the teams that are at the top of the heap. Or at least have a really good chance to be once again this season. But I think what really can make this one the one that's different is just that Drake Maye can be a singular force, right? And I'm a huge believer in Drake. I felt, my rank of the quarterbacks was Caleb, Jaden, Drake, but I truly believe the upside for Drake is as good as either of those players. I mean that. This is not lip service to Patriots fans. Drake at 21 years old with elite athleticism and an excellent arm and arm strength and off the charts character, like all of those things are like already in the toolbox. Like those cannot be coached. Those are there. Now it's up to the Patriots and everybody around Drake Maye to kind of get him to take all of those great tools and actually like sort of set up a process here, like get on the assembly line and start, putting together good throws consecutively and being a little bit more refined than he was last season. And so I think it's going to take like a full team effort. I guess that's a little bit too cliche, but it's going to require some discipline from a lot of different parties. Like to go back to the question we were just discussing, it's going to be hard to resist the temptation of playing Drake Maye because of the fact that he's a 3rd overall pick, the highest pick the team has taken since Bledsoe in '93. So there's going to be some temptation that you got to resist. But if you're starting to feel like Drake sitting on the bench, even if it's for 5 games, might wind up proving to be one of the most impactful things for his development, you got to find a way to resist temptation. I know that CJ Stroud wound up starting right away last year for the Texans. But DeMeco Ryans was a linebacker. It's like Gerard Mayo played for the team or coached for the team that he spent much of his career for. In the case of Mayo, the only team he ever played for. He made sure, and he was very clear last offseason, it's got to be earned, right? And this is not going to be a handout because you're the number 2 pick in the draft. Maybe people thought that was him being disingenuous. I don't know. But I felt like Houston, and maybe this is a bit of me kind of like retroactively fitting what I believe into what actually took place. But I thought they did a good job of slowly bringing CJ Stroud along during the offseason, making him earn it. And then once he kind of got going and got rolling, doing everything they could to maximize what his strengths were. He's got a lot of those, so it's a little bit easier to do than many quarterbacks. But that to me is the model the Patriots have to follow, is you got to resist temptation on the short-term gain because you have to be concerned about a decade plus of Drake Maye. This is not about how he performs in 2024. And I know Patriots fans are going to be sitting here comparing Drake's success to the success of the other quarterbacks in this year's class. I think there's a pretty darn good chance that J.J. McCarthy coming out of the gates looks really good in Minnesota. Not because JJ isn't a good player, but because he's got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw and Aaron Jones, guys at the 5 or 6 key pivotal spots to help a quarterback look really good. So for the Patriots, it's ignoring that kind of information and that kind of analysis, and instead being focused on finding a way to get Drake to be the player that I really do believe he has within him.
Field Yates, you are a champion. You are such a busy guy. We so appreciate your time. This was fantastic, bud. We really do. Thank you so much because you got so much on your plate. So to carve out a little bit for us, this has been tremendous. Thanks, buddy.
Glad to do it anytime, Phil, and be well. Talk to you again soon.
Great stuff there from Field. Really appreciate him giving some time to us, talk about some of these Patriots picks and about the draft in general. I just feel as though there is so much to dig into when it comes to this Patriots draft and these 8 players that they took, 7 of them on the offensive side of the ball, how it impacts the roster, how some of these players should be handled, what their roles should be, what makes them tick. This is the sort of stuff that we're going to be diving into here on Next Pats over the next few weeks and months. We're going to continue to bring on some great guests for you to give us even more intel on these players, whether it's Drake Maye, Ja'Lynn Polk, Javon Baker, who I think we need to be talking about quite a bit. Really interested to see what happens with him. Rookie minicamp is coming up this week. This weekend, we'll have access to some of these players. We'll have the ability to watch these guys out on the practice field. So much more to share with you on this Patriots draft class. Just giving you a little taste from one of the best in the business in Field Yates. So appreciate you listening. Thanks to John the Skull Crusher Henry, as always. And keep an eye out for the next edition of Next Pats. We'll be hitting you with another episode very soon. We'll talk to you then.